Hello, welcome to this video about my Stonehenge experience. And this might possibly even have to be a couple of videos because there's so much to say. I've been putting this together for a couple of weeks and strange things have happened since I've even been trying to put it together. But anyway, I shall explain that as we go along. If I need to make 2 videos, I will. So bear with me. Let's try and cover as much of this as we can. So, just before I start, I have got no agenda in telling you this. I am not trying to sell you a theory. I haven't got one. I'm not trying to prove anything or create some drama or make myself seem special or important. And I've got nothing to sell you. So, there's really no reason for me to say this other than I just want to share this with you and hopefully make some sense of it with you, if at all possible. Because I've been living with this for almost 30 years now, which is a bit scary, thinking this was 30 years ago and I'm getting old. So the point of making this really is just to try and get some clarity. Or maybe that's not possible, but I'd like to share it with you anyway because it's so weird. It's the weirdest thing that I've ever experienced and I still don't know what to make of it at all. And I'm certainly not going to suggest what I think it is, but it contains a lot of different elements. It's got possible UFO in the strictest sense of the term, that there was an unidentified flying object involved in this. Possible time slip, possible alternate reality, possible missing time, and possible military involvement, because we're talking about an area that you can see here that is on Salisbury Plain, which is an absolute hub of military activity and involvement. So it could be any or all of those things. Make your own mind up. Let me know what you think. And again, before I start, I will just say that this is coming to you from a completely different era. The date of this event was Saturday, November the 24th, 1990. And obviously that was a different era. There was no mobile phones, there was no internet. Any communication had to be done through a payphone or through a landline at home, and you had to do your research through books in the library. Everything was different. So I wasn't picking up anything that happened during this experience through looking at the internet. There was no internet. There was nothing except for the books that you bought or the books that you borrowed. And there was very little information in those days. So if I leave anything out of this video or the other video, that if I have to make a second one, I will add anything that I've missed out into the description, because I do these videos all in one take. There is no editing and I can't go back and add bits in. So if I leave anything out that's important, I will add it in either in the description underneath or in the pinned comment. Anyway, let us get on. There is a lot to say. So the background to this, as I say, it was Saturday, November the 24th, 1990. And the story really is, to me, more extraordinary because it is there's a lot of very mundane facts involved in it. What was happening was that I lived in London. I was teaching or training to teach at the time, and I had a partner at the time who was an engineer, and a very much, as I like to call it, nuts and bolts, if you can't hit it with a hammer it doesn't exist kind of bloke, which was good. I am glad he was with me because he was the most ideal person to be with when something like this happens, because he was not at all, shall we say, woo-woo. He did not believe in that kind of thing, or, well, he did because he experienced quite a few things with me, but that wasn't his natural inclination. He liked to, this reality was all there was, and he wasn't fanciful in any shape or form. He was a very ordinary bloke, really. So we decided that we were going to, we'd been to see his family, and I'm going to try and show you this on an old map. This was my dad's map, and it has been heavily written on by my dad, but it's the only one that I've got that shows the area as it used to be. This was a 2000 and something map before they changed the layout of Stonehenge and the roads. I'm just going to show you the basic route. So we started off roughly here. Here is the city of Bath in the West Country in England. And we came, I don't know the exact roads we took, but we must have come from here somewhere down I would presume the most direct route would be this one, and excuse my dad's scribbling there, Stonehenge is, it's a bit closer. I'm doing this because it's really hard to find any sort of reference on the internet. In fact, I haven't been able to find one at all, or I wouldn't be using this old map, but there is Stonehenge. So I don't know, the journey might have been about an hour, I'm not sure, but we came somewhere down here and we ended up, where are we? I've lost it already. We ended up on this road, the A344. I'm presuming we might have come this way, and here is the Stonehenge monument. Let us move this out of the way. So, yes, we were visiting, we were going back to London where I was living. There is a very ordinary fact to this. While we had been visiting Tim's family, we'd got a banana for the journey back, or I'd got a banana for the journey back, and I put it in the car. We'll come back to the banana later, because again, it's one of those little strangenesses that is more fascinating for the fact it's so ordinary. And on this particular night, it was a particularly clear and beautiful November night, that kind of crisp, clear, wintry sort of night. And so Tim decided to go back, via Stonehenge, which I had not been to and didn't have particularly an interest in at the time, but he thought it would be a nice, it's a very boring journey back to London, so, you know, it would make it a bit nicer because it was such a lovely evening, we could go back via Stonehenge. And I didn't have any idea about the site, and this is what it would have looked like at the time. And this is what it looks like now, but we can come back to that later. As you can see, this is the A344, which is what was there at the time. And this is how Stonehenge looks now, since they did the works on it in about 2012. Now there is no road anymore. So if you wanted to go back and look at the story and see what I'm telling you, you wouldn't be able to, because that's all gone. You couldn't even go back and refer to what I'm saying. So it is really another time in more ways than one. So we were travelling along and we came to a junction in the road, which I wasn't aware of where we were because I'd never done this journey. I didn't know. So I was just pootling along with him. We were listening to music and it was all very normal. And we came to this junction and we were facing, I was the passenger obviously, we were facing what I thought was, it looked like a wood, it looked like quite a thick bank of trees, and suddenly, I don't know how this happened, suddenly we were aware above this bank of trees as we were waiting to turn onto the main road, which would have been the A344, an enormous orange ball appeared in the sky. I mean, it was enormous, and it was just above the trees. As we were parked waiting to turn onto the road, it was just there above the trees right in front of us. And then there was the break in the traffic and we were able to turn onto this road here. And as we did so, obviously the driver, Tim, could not look at the ball, but he was saying, what is that? What is that? And I was looking at it. And as we moved off, it moved off as well. And it was, I don't know whether we were coming from this direction or this direction. I'm really sorry, I don't know. But as we were coming along this road, going towards Stonehenge, the ball of light would have been on this side, and it was basically following the car along as we were travelling. And I was to say it's following us, but he couldn't look because he was driving. But as he was driving, he said, look at this. And as we were going along, we went through literally a strip of mist. I have never seen anything like it before or since. It was just like a line of mist going across the road. So he was looking at that, what, that was really strange, and I was watching this ball of light. I didn't know how close we were to Stonehenge. I was just watching this ball of light. So then we approached along this road. I don't know whether we were coming this way or this way. And we parked up next to this heel stone here. We'll come back to all of this later because there's more strangeness involved in this too. So we parked up there because we were going to just stop there anyway, and just because it was a lovely evening and we were just going to look at the stones. But Tim had told me that there were always security guards sort of prowling, protecting the area, and that if you stopped there for any length of time, they would approach you. So we knew we didn't have very long there, because that would probably happen. They'd move you on because they didn't want you lurking about or trying to get into the circle or whatever. So we stopped there, but Tim had the foresight, because I think he was already a bit spooked by this orange ball of light. He had the foresight to leave the engine running in the car. So we just parked up, and I, strangely enough for me, because I've always been very anxious about the idea of a UFO, I just got out of the car and thought, I want to have a look. And the orange ball of light, as we'd stopped here, see if I can get a better picture of that for you. Ah, yeah, here we go. So we were on this road here. Here is Stonehenge. Imagine it is dark, and we come up here, and we are, there is the hailstone, which I just showed you in the other picture. We stopped here, and the ball of light stopped as well, and it was over this field here. It was somewhere, it would have been somewhere up here. So we got out of the car, and although Tim was now out, not driving, he didn't really show very much interest. And I was saying, look at this, it stopped, and it was up here. So I got out of the car, and see if we can get a bit closer. Not having any idea about the site or what was feasible or what wasn't feasible, we were here. We'll come back to that later, but just take my word for it, we were somewhere about here. I got out and I rested my hand on this hailstone, palm absolutely flat. I didn't have to stretch. I didn't know any different, so I didn't think it was strange. I just rested my hand on this stone and looked across over here. If you imagine, I'm looking over this field where the orange ball of light was. And I had my hand on it. And as I put my hand on it, I felt like, when something is intensely cold and you feel like you're going to pull your skin off because you're stuck to it. It had that kind of feeling to it. It was a bit tingly, and it felt incredibly, I don't know, it just felt like my hand was sort of magnetised to it or stuck to it. But I wasn't that interested in that. I thought that was a bit strange, but I was more interested in the fact that this orange ball of light was over here. It was almost like I was mesmerised by it. But Tim wasn't saying a lot, really. I don't remember him having a conversation with me. But he was more interested in the fact that he could see the moon over the stones over here. So he was looking at that, and I was saying, but look at this. And as I was watching this, can I get you that's probably not any better, but you can see it from, so we would have been somewhere here, and I'm looking over here, and he's looking over here, where the moon was over the stones. And it was an incredibly clear and bright night. And at this point, we hadn't really realised that there wasn't anybody else around, but there wasn't. Anyway, we'll come back to that later. So I'm looking over here, and as I'm looking over here, this orange ball of light decides that it's going to prove to me that it isn't anything that you could write off as a flare, because this is Salisbury Plain, and flares are orange, and they do go up and they drift down, and I've seen loads of them. I've lived in Wiltshire since. I've lived there and visited there lots of times, and I know what a flare looks like, and I know what this looked like, and it decided to prove to me that it wasn't a flare or anything that you could pinpoint as something rationally normal and not unidentified. So it decided to do an aerial display, and it would zip off at weird angles. It would literally zip off, and then it would plummet, and then it would vanish, and I'd think, oh, it's gone, and then it would reappear, and it would do something else, and it just kept doing this. I don't even know how long it was doing this for. I just was staring at this thing like it was just compelling, and all the time I had my hand just resting palm onto that stone, the hailstone, which is here. So, and that continued. It just kept this orange ball of light. Now I kept saying to Tim, look at this thing, and he said, no, I'm going to get my camera out of the boot and take a picture of the moon over the stones. And I just thought, oh, all right, whatever. I couldn't bear to take my eyes off this thing, so I just thought, well, get on with it. Why don't you want to take a picture of this? But it was like being in a dream. That's the best way I can describe it. It was like being in a really soupy kind of atmosphere. It seemed normal at the time, but it was also odd. You weren't behaving normally. To be standing there and watching this huge, I described it as house-sized, but I can't put a size on it. This huge ball of light doing this aerobatic zipping about, and him looking over here, and it was all weird. And the fact that there was nobody. It was completely silent. It was silent. It was brightly lit by the moon. There was no traffic. It was just us and this orange ball of light and him. So I don't know how much time had elapsed, but he said, I'm going to get my camera. And the next thing I knew, Let's see if I've got another picture that I can just illustrate this to you here. These are all old photographs and they're all a bit... So we are here, I'm leaning on there and I'm looking out across here and he's looking this way. Suddenly, Tim shouts at me, get in the car, don't look round, just get in the car. And he was really, really agitated. And normally I go, what, you know, I don't want to get in the car, I'm looking at this, but I actually did what he said. I don't know why, I just did. I can't rationalise any of this. So, you know, thankfully he left the engine running and he just zoomed out of there. And I still couldn't really, I got in the car quite placidly and I was still concerned about this orange ball of light. And as he drove off, I don't know whether we were going this way or this way. I really can't tell you. I think this way, but I don't know now. All I know is that we parked on this side right next to the stone, the heel stone. So as we started to move off at quite a rate of knots, because as I found out quite shortly afterwards, he was terrified, the orange ball of light started to move along. So if we're going this way, it started to then, it was like it was mirroring us. It was like there was some sort of interaction going on between me and it. Not that I'm saying again that I'm special or whatever. It just, that's how it seemed. We moved off, it moved off in the, you know, just followed in a smooth line. It stopped doing its display and it just moved off like we did. We'll come back to that in a minute. So let's just go back here. It turns out that while he was getting his camera out of the boot, let's go a bit closer. So he's here, I'm there, the car is wherever it is, in this area. While I am looking over here and he's getting his camera out of the boot to take a picture of the moon, a black figure, I'm just going to show you my rubbishy sketch there, but that's all there was to it in his own notes. A black figure apparently approached from here. Now he couldn't speak about this until we got quite a way down the road. He was really, really shaken up. But before I get to that description, so we were driving off. We must have been going this way because there's a car facing that way. So we must have been driving off this way. As we got along the road and the ball of light is following along here, sort of parallel, mirroring us. As we got quite a long way along this road, and he couldn't speak yet, so he hadn't told me about this figure, we drove through another strip of mist. And at that point, very shortly, either exactly at that point or very shortly afterwards, the orange ball of light was no longer visible to me. I don't know whether it just disappeared or whether I just couldn't see it anymore, but I was no longer aware of it. So I was no longer sort of mesmerised looking this way. And I started paying attention to Tim, who I then realised was absolutely terrified. And he said, when we get far enough away from that place, I'm going to tell you what I saw. But okay, I'm going to tell you now what you saw, and I'm definitely going to have to make another video because I've already used quite a lot of space up. I do apologise if this is too long-winded, but there's so much to say. Anyway, so as he was getting the camera out of the car, he told me that this black figure was approaching us from on this side. So the fence is here. There was a fence there. There still is a fence there as far... No, there can't be because it's not, doesn't look like that anymore, but there was a fence there. And the figure was coming along here, and he said it was moving very quick. It was big, it was black, it was horrible. That's all he kept saying. It was big, it was black, it was horrible. And he said it was about 7 feet tall, and it was moving through the deep leaves, and he seemed to find that really disturbing. It was moving through the deep leaves, he kept saying. And he said that he saw it coming, and he thought, he didn't know what he thought, but he turned back to the boot again. And as he turned back and looked again, the thing had actually come through the fence and was right behind him, and that's when he screamed at me, get in the car, don't look round. So I was not aware of this big black 7 foot tall, it was big, it was black, it was horrible thing, person, shape, entity. I was not aware of that at all. All I was concerned about was this orange ball of light over here. All he was concerned about before the big black figure was the moon over the stones. He did see the ball of light, but he wasn't interested in it. But I did not see or hear this big black figure at all. I was completely unaware of it. We were in two totally different states, I think, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. His terror was absolutely real, and he could not wait to get as far away from this place as possible. So he said by the time he'd got in the car and we'd actually started to move off, I'm presuming the figure must be somewhere over here, by the time he'd sped off and I'd actually obediently got in the car, the figure was actually right by his car door, he said. And I saw nothing, I heard nothing, I was completely unaware of this figure. So I don't even remember the drive back to London, but it's quite a long way. It's at least an hour's drive, and you know, he was very shaken up by this. I was strangely not shaken up because I hadn't seen the black figure, and I was just fascinated by this orange ball of light, which was totally out of character for me, because normally that would have really freaked me out, because it was obviously interacting with me. It was anyway. So I just have to add that after we drove through the band of mist, the second band of mist that was across the road, we then started to notice after a while that there were other cars on the road, because during this whole experience there had been nobody. Not a single car, not a light, not anything, no signs of life, and it had been totally silent. So when he said the figure was walking through the deep leaves, I didn't hear anything, but we'll come back to that again, probably in the second video now, because I'm about to get cut off in a bit. So we went back to London. I had a flatmate at the time who was also a very down-to-earth and lovely person, and she had the foresight to say, write it down now while you remember it, and we did. We wrote it down and we drew some pictures. All of that information is in my storage unit with the rest of my things, the majority of my things, and it's a long way away and I've got no access to it. I'm not going to go into my personal situation, but I'm not in my own space at the moment, and all my things are a long way away, so I had no access to my original notes, unfortunately. And when I get them back eventually, maybe I'll make this video again. But I do have my book, this book that I wrote in 1995, 5 years later after this event, and which I referred to my notes, or the notes that we'd made. I referred to those notes to write that passage in this book. I told the story and I used the notes. So I've referred to that book now, and also to my memory, because my memory is pretty clear about most of this. I mean, it was so extraordinary. Before I finish this section and go into the next section, which explains why it is so incredibly, even more bizarre than we even thought it was, I will just say that when we were aware of things again as we were driving back to London, before we got back to the flat and my flatmate, the banana that I had for the journey was no longer edible. It had gone off. We'd got to Stonehenge approximately pretty close to 8 o'clock on that evening, so it wasn't that late. It wasn't late. You know, there would have been still plenty of people driving around at that time of night. When we'd actually become aware of what was going on, once we'd gone through the mist, once he'd told me his story, we realised that 45 minutes had gone by. Now, it seemed like a few minutes, but again, we'll come back to that in the part two. How very formal. And I will explain to you what happened next. And it gets weirder, I can assure you. So I hope that gave you some sort of insight into the first part. Please join me again for part 2 and I will tell you about the rest. Okay, thanks for watching. See you again in part 2. Bye.